The Academy, quote, seeks to promote and strengthen the speech and debate community in the greater San Francisco Bay Area through student participation in public speaking classes and competitions. Stephen has been involved in public forum debate, formerly Ted Turner debate, for 20 years between competing and coaching. In his own words, PF debate is my life. Welcome, Stephen.
Hey, Joel.
I want to talk about the Brooks Academy, actually, first before anything else. Do you get confused all the time with the school in Texas? So I was researching.
I know
like,
there's
this
another
guy's got a whole
Brooks.
school.
Yeah, I know there's another Brooks Academy out there. And then I was actually updating my LinkedIn recently because I'm back in college and they have us like writing resumes and our CVs and everything. And actually, so now the Brooks Academy, I stopped doing that back in 2015. Just for the record, I coach on my own now, and I have Brooks Institute, which is just me solo project, right? Cool. Brooks Academy, I used to coach with friends, and we did that for about 3 years. I had a bunch of friends and colleagues from my old high school, and we had a middle school team of about 100 doing that for a couple of years. But yeah, what's called so far, to answer your question, I don't think we've been confused too much with the Texas school. I don't think we've ever bumped into them, so that definitely helps.
That is good.
Apparently there's another Brooks Academy or something out there, and I was looking at like, oh, I bought the domain before them, so I'm good.
Beautiful. That's good. Do you mind telling me sort of what happened with the institute, like giving me a sort of brief life story of the institute, because I'm very curious about sort of like how these academies and schools, especially on the private side of coaching debate, sort of rise and fall. I'm curious.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, when I saw your interview with Mark and he was talking about like the Houston market, like while I was listening to it, I was like, my market's the exact opposite. And so I'm Silicon Valley, there's tons of money out here. I went to a high school called James Logan in one of the suburbs out here, and Logan's great. I was very, very fortunate. Logan's a big school. It's 4,000 plus kids. There's only one school in the entire high school for the entire city. It's super, just like Houston, super ethnically diverse. So it's like 50% Asian, then Hispanic, and then Black, I think, for majorities. And so I was there for 4 years as a student, 2001 to 2005. Our high school team was 200 plus kids every year.
Wow.
And so we were competing for the state title pretty much every season. My first 3 years, we kept losing to Bellarmine College Preparatory in San Jose. And then finally, my senior year, we beat them, thank God. So really, really great experience. I loved competing in high school. And then, and just for the record, halfway through my high school career is when Public Forum came out. So I think Public Forum, I want to say is 2002-ish, right around there, as Ted Turner debate, like you mentioned. And then he pulled his funding. And so I won my school's home tournament 2 years in a row. And so I have one medal that says I'm the Ted Turner champion, and another medal that says I'm the controversy debate champion. I technically never did Public Forum because then later the name would change.
So there's this interim name of Public Forum, controversy debate. I had no idea.
Yeah, so it was Ted Turner 1 year, and then it was controversy while I guess they were trying to make something up, right? So I got to go dig up that medal. It was a collector's item now. But yeah, so I did, high school forensics, and then I coached at Logan for about 5 years, I think, 4 or 5 years, up until about 2011. And then as much as I loved it there, it was time to move on and try new things. And Fremont is the neighboring city to Union City. And Fremont's it's where all the Google and Facebook engineers live if they don't live in San Jose, like right next to the Apple headquarters or Cupertino, right? And so Fremont's super rich, like even richer than my hometown, one city over. And this tutoring center hired me to coach middle school kids, which I was like, oh my God, middle schoolers do this? So back in 2011, I had no idea that anybody outside of high school did forensics, right? So we always viewed forensics as like a high school activity. So one, it was to coach middle school kids. There was a local middle school of 7th and 8th graders, Hopkins Junior High out in Fremont. And then it was to coach them in MSPDP. There's something called the High School Public Debate Program in the United States. It's basically like 3 versus 3 parley, right? And then they have a program underneath it, MSPDP, Middle School Public Debate Program, 3 versus 3 parley. Each side gets 3 speeches. Cool. Yeah. So I did that. I coached it, and I hated it. Right? Like I hated the format. It was 3 kids versus 3 kids, and each kid gives 1 speech. And so like you would get up there and BS, and then never have to defend anything you say, right? Because there's no like direct rebuttal. Like everybody would just kind of get up there and like do their own dance, and then get down, right?
I see. Yeah.
And then so anyway, I coached that for about a couple tournaments. And then the kids in Fremont are super smart and super talented. You know, all their, like I said, like all their parents are engineers, and there's a lot of wealth in the area. They're all honors kids, right? And so then within like a couple months working with them, I was like, man, like I could coach them in public forum, and I'm sure these middle school kids, like I could take them to high school invitationals, enter them in the JV division, and I'm sure they would do great. And so in December, the first year I was coaching middle school, we took our kids to Santa Clara University. We have a big invitational every November, December, and they kicked ass. We took, I think, 12, I want to say like 12-ish teams, and like 8 of them broke. We were like half the Elam bracket for JV. Yeah, they cleaned up and they did great. And so that was like the start of me coaching middle school kids. And then also like, instead of just having this class designed around this rinky dinky, like dumb things down for the middle school kids format, I was like, why not just train the middle school kids like my cutthroat high school team 1 city over and do that. And so that's how I got started doing that. And then within a couple months, it was like, oh, well, they could do speech too. So I reached out to my buddy, Steven, who was a speech coach, also named Steven. Right. And then, and then, so like, you know, reached out to him to coach speech. And then I brought a lot of other my friends and colleagues over from Logan, just because they're like literally lived next door. Right. And then basically we morphed this tutoring centers team into a miniature version of our high school team. And first year we introduced them to public forum and speech events. And then the second year we took them to middle school nationals, and they won nationals. Right. We didn't know what to expect. Like we took, I think, 15, 16, 17 kids, and we're like, oh, let's go check out nationals. Right. And it's middle school NSDA nationals at the time was so different from high school, and still is different, I believe. There's no qualification process. It's just open. You just go. And then back then, independent schools and clubs were allowed to go. So like the middle school scene was like the wild, wild west. There wasn't a lot of established school teams. And so you actually had like a lot of tutoring centers and clubs, taking their kids to the tournament.
I see.
Yeah. And so we went there and we did well. And then eventually my friends and I had a falling out with the tutoring center. We got too big. And then we ended up starting our own private program that became the Brooks Academy. And, you know, like I said, we ended up having a team. I want to say coaches, maybe half a dozen to a dozen coaches, depending on the part of the season, and anywhere from like 50 to 100 middle school kids competing.
Wow. That's some big teams. You say obviously in the way that the national tournaments were structured, let's say there's been some changes. Like I think even in middle school now for some tournaments, like for the middle school TOC, like there wasn't any qualifications this year, and I believe that's pretty normal. But yeah, students typically have to debate with their like represented by their school team.
Yeah, and that's definitely a whole 20-minute subject if you wanna go there.
Not necessarily, but you just say that you see kind of this difference between let's talk about public forum between middle school and high school. I have found that the upper levels of middle school PF would be extremely competitive in high school. Like there's even some middle school rounds I often prefer to high school rounds, you know, because I don't really know why this is. It seems like the 4-year age gap should be able to just in maturity and brain development and kind of knowledge base, it seems like it should be able to make a very stark difference between the two. And it could be that a lot of students stop doing public forum in high school and switch to policy or something else.
I've had that observation. If I could just throw one theory out,
Yeah, yeah.
And if you're a middle school kid doing public forum or like forensics in general, you're probably a tryhard, right?
Hmm.
Because like when
Hmm.
I take my middle school kids to tournaments and I tell them, hey, you're gonna go most likely in the JV division at this high school tournament and face a couple ninth and 10th graders, right? And then but I'll always follow that with, you're gonna face some ninth and 10th graders, but most of them haven't been prepping in the summer like you have, right?
Hmm.
So like they might have actually be like new kids to their team, right? You know, God bless their hearts, right? Take them out. You actually have more training and prep and coaching than them, especially if, and I hate to say this, but especially if they come from a public school program that doesn't have a lot of resources, right?
Hmm.
So you know, to still a little bit more confidence into the younger kids, like yes, you might be a little seventh and eighth grader, but you've been working harder.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it depends on the team. It depends on the kids for sure. But I'm just saying for the top rounds, you know. We also at in the, I guess, the Taiwan circuit, just at the school that I teach at anyway, we coach a ton of elementary students, and we use sort of a modified public forum format. And yeah, I mean, people are constantly shocked. Like, how do you get elementary kids to debate politics? Like, you
Okay,
know,
so
how do you get that?
that's the final frontier for me. I've seen
Mm,
high school, I coached middle school, and then now that I'm back in college, I've seen some college rounds, right? Which I had never seen before prior to like a year or two ago. I actually have one fourth grader.
mm,
Yeah, and actually he's one of my best debaters. And this happened with my little sister. I don't know if this happens with your students. I coached this fourth grader's brother as an eighth grader. So I coached his brother, and then he was at the dinner table listening to all the lectures, right? And so I'm
mm,
preparing his older brother for middle school LD tournament, state championship tournament on like U.S. drug policy, and he's
mm,
sitting there as like a second and third grader, just like listening and like taking notes himself and just absorbing it. I had two younger sisters, and my youngest sister would shadow me when I judged public forum and parliamentary debate in high school. And so by the time she became a freshman, she was already a year or two ahead of everybody just because she knew the lingo, the terminology. She had already practiced flowing and everything. And in my experience, that's usually how younger kids like get into this activity at an especially young age, right? Um, yeah, that's at least my experience. I can't imagine taking like a brand new classroom of, you know, third or fourth graders with zero experience and then be like, hey, we're going to debate, you know, Medicare for all or
mm.
nuclear policy.
You have to start with cats versus dogs for sure.
Yeah.
But they're yeah, I think people, you know, there's a common refrain for debate coaches and perhaps some teachers in general. I don't know. I mostly talk to debate teachers or debate coaches, but that like kids are capable of extraordinary things, and that if you have any sort of doubt about sort of the future of our world or of our country, like coaching debate makes you very optimistic about things. Because kids really do have incredible potential, and I think much more than we might give them credit to. Now,
I
that's
remember
not to say,
I remember the previous interview you did with Niles, and that point definitely stuck out to me too. And I like the point you made is like, should we be coaching them to debate, or should they be actually like going outside and picking up litter and doing something more productive with their time? Whereas he definitely has a more optimistic view. You know what? In my experience, there's one thing that the younger students have that I wish I could get my middle school and high school kids to like hold on to. I've taught some elementary debate classes as young as second grade, right? And definitely not preparing them for public forum tournaments, just like you said,
hmm,
cats versus dogs, you know, after school at the elementary, right? It's the level of abstraction. So,
hmm,
like, little kids always want to be part of the conversation. They haven't developed like all those like social anxieties where I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. So,
hmm,
for
okay,
instance, I'll be in front of an elementary class and I'll be like, hey, today we're going to talk about the police, or we're going to debate a topic about policemen, right? And immediately, first kid, my dad's a policeman, right? And
hmm,
then the next kid, I saw a policeman yesterday because they want to be in the conversation. And then the next kid, my mom got pulled over by a policeman last night, right? And like no, like they want to be part of the conversation. So like their brain, you know, they just try to think of anything related to whatever I'm talking about, right? And so like
yeah,
just to give you an example of that, like in practice, we had this topic in public forum. I don't know if you were coaching back then. It was a couple years ago. It was like increased U.S. military spending. And it was like when that topic came out, I was like, this is the dumbest thing ever. I think like we were actually like in the middle of like a recession or whatever, and just like we outspend everybody, like increasing military spending stupid, right? How the hell are we going to do this, right? And so like I was trying to come up with some convoluted plan to run in public forum illegally, right? Or like, you know, some sort of argument, panish argument to make. And then what I found was this really funny article. I forget the guy's name, James something, the former director of the FBI. There was this article where he was speaking, he was like lecturing to a group, and he was talking about cybersecurity. And he was telling this group how the United States has a ton of really talented hackers that he would like to hire for like Department of Homeland Security, things like that. But he can't do it because they all smoke weed, right? And so I wanted my eighth graders, my seventh and eighth graders, to run the argument that we should just barely slightly increase military spending to create a program where we hire a bunch of weed smoking hackers, right? and then run that card, right?
Specifically.
Yeah, right. And then what's it called? Because like here's the director of the FBI saying like we need them, right? It's for our homeland cybersecurity. Like we need to protect the power grid, right? And none of my kids could get past the weed thing. Like even here in California, right? They're like, no, not marijuana, no. Like they wouldn't even entertain the argument in practice. I don't know if the elementary kids could have entertained that argument any better, but at least they probably would be more open-minded. What's weed,
interesting.
What's marijuana? And I'm like, I can't give you guys that lecture today.
Yeah, really fascinating. What do you think about this question about the practicality of debate? Because it's a question I'm very interested in. My kind of view, and I think it's still a developing view, but it's that like we all know that school is a lot of nonsense. Everyone is very familiar with this, right? And I tell my students constantly, because I believe this in my heart. I think I hope that my job disappears as soon as possible. I really I look forward to a future where you can download the 99-cent debate coach app from the App Store, and it can control the classroom and provide individual attention and coach people and be much more efficient. I hope that day comes, right? But at the same time, I think that debate is one of the most useful things you can be doing in school if you're going to be in school. I do also believe that. But I think the whole system, I kind of envision a utopia where we are transitioning to something much more practical, where kids are actually incorporated into society in a way that we kind of don't trust them to have any real meaningful interaction with society, for the first 18 years of their life, which I think is nonsense. Well, what do you think about this?
Yeah, like I think it's such a great, interesting question. I also remember watching that video prior to your interview with Mark, where you were talking about like the pros and cons of doing this activity and how it's marketed, right? Like we say like, oh, debate's going to make your kids smarter and all these things, right? But if you surveyed the SAT scores of all the kids that do horseback riding, I'm pretty sure they're all very high, right? And so like that whole correlation causation issue, right? I think like obviously I agree like 90% of what you just said. I would love for there to be debate Khan Academy that could replace most of us in like most of these lectures. If I never have to lecture on CWI again and a lot of like these basics, right? Then great, right? But what's it called? I interviewed the director of forensics over at my college for a college project recently, and he said something very interesting. We were talking about this whole online Zoom debate world, right? And I love it. Like I love 80-90% of it. I don't have to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning to drive to some godforsaken high school with no Wi-Fi and stay there all day eating carbs, right? Like I love just waking up in my apartment, and I also love that the tournaments are like cheaper and way more accessible to the kids too. But my college director of forensics, he brought up something interesting. He goes like, but especially as a college coach, I miss all that downtime. I miss traveling with the kids. I miss all the hallway talk, right? And as a coach who's worked with middle school, sticking with middle school kids, I've seen total transformations. I've seen the quiet, nerdy kid who watches Naruto in the back of the class, who like doesn't talk to anyone, just watches anime. I've seen him like turn into a social butterfly, and I saw I had this one dopey kid, class clown type, and then I was walking in my town a couple years ago, and I bumped into him in front of like Rite Aid drugstore, and he was campaigning for local congressman. Right. So
Wow.
yeah. So like I've definitely seen, kids take the tools, like whether it's the argumentation, the public speaking, or even just like the social skills. Right. So I think like that's especially why a lot of us like the activity, especially when we're in large teams. What's it called? My t-shirts for our program used to say speech debate family on the back. Right. And I genuinely like, I hate to sound like Dom from Fast and Furious, but like I genuinely like the family aspect of like these teams. Right. As much as I love the convenience of this like online tournament world, right, it really does suck that we don't get that. Like, my kids did really well this year at certain tournaments and whatnot. But if you ask me, like, what was your most fun coaching this year, like nicest moment, it was when me and my students got together and played Among Us for 2 hours, like, we're waiting for postings to go up, and like that social aspect of this. And then I guess like going back to the idea of like videos replacing us and whatnot. Yes, like I think we definitely have that job as like teachers, instructors, coaches to lecture on those topics, and we definitely wish that could be automated. I think this might have been said in your previous interview. I think my goal is not just to teach the kids debate, but hopefully make them better people, right? And better critical thinkers, right? And so, you know what? Like, I'm probably in the minority saying this, but I really like the social media democracy topic that we ended the season on. Right? It was one of my favorite topics. Like, me and my kids, legit, out of all my classes, my Saturday middle school classes, like more of the older, more advanced students. And so, like, on a couple Saturday afternoons in a row before the end of season tournaments, we would just be chilling on Zoom, and like we would legitimately have discussions about like what is a good, what are the values of a democracy, what makes a good democracy, right? And I love the reason I love that topic so much is I think it exposed a lot of students who just like play debate games and like do like debate dancing, right? Like our coach said to read this argument, or like the packet, the brief said to read this argument. And then when they say this, we say this back, right? So to give an example, right, I just thought this was so silly, and I apologize if this team is listening. One team that I judged ran the argument that social media is bad for democracy because it creates violent protests, right? And then the other team responded. They immediately had a card, right? And again, like these are the amazing middle school kids, like immediately they can pull cards, right? So the other team had a card, and they go, well, according to this card, only 15% of BLM protests were violent. Right? And then in my mind as a judge, right, and of course I'm trying my best not to intervene, but this is something I later talked about with my students on Saturday after judging that round. I'm like, guys, America was founded on a revolution. Violent protest is like part of our country's history, right? Like I joked yesterday on the 4th of July, right? Like us Americans, we celebrate our country's independence by blowing up a small part of it, to steal a line from The Simpsons, right? And so it's we do that, right? And then like the other argument that I thought was silly too, that we talked about a lot, was the echo chamber argument, right? Kids are like, on Facebook, like you only see one side, right? And then so then I love to cross-sex my students. I don't know if you do that too, right? But I love that back and forth cross-sex my students. So one of my students read that argument that he actually ran in his case, right? And I go, okay, let me ask you a question. You ready, cross-sex? He's like, okay, cool. All right. Is the Democratic National Convention democratic? Yes, right? Even though it's 20,000 people all for that side. Yeah, right. Or then, my other favorite one was there's lies and misinformation that social media spreads about like political topics, right? So I asked my kids, I'm like, okay, everyone here has seen the presidential debate, right? Yes. So the two people get up there and one says one thing and the other one says the opposite. Is the presidential debate democratic? Obviously, right? Well, if one guy says A and the other guy says B, then obviously one of them's lying or spreading misinformation, right? And like I said, it was such a nice topic where we could actually like, what's it called? We could actually sit down and have like Lincoln Douglas style discussions about like actual like values and definitions. Like I love framework. I really love framework and counterplans, right? So unfortunately I don't much like the written rules. But yeah, like I love having discussions about framework and interpretation and like how to like think about actual things. And I think that's our value, right? Or at least that's, I think my value as a coach is to help kids actually learn how to think better or think at all, right? Instead of this, have you ever seen the game Dance Dance Revolution? The dancing arcade
I know,
game?
yeah, sure.
Yeah, I grew up playing that, right? I
Mhm.
cannot dance a lick, right? Like, I'm a horrible dancer, but I know how to hit arrows on the floor, right? And I sometimes think that, like, depending on, where you debate your tournaments and whatnot, some of these kids are like, I read this, I read this, I read this, and when they say this, I say this, and just becomes hitting the arrows on the ground and then not actually thinking about, like, what you're saying, right? And then that's why
I love that way that you think about this. I've never had a
that's
good
why, like,
analogy to put to that phenomenon, but that's perfect.
Yeah, like the DDRification of debate, right? They do this, and like my little sister, she going back to her, she did Lincoln Douglas at a varsity level before she quit her junior year, and that's what I noticed, right? Like my little sister, and then she was a AP history kid too, right? Like she took A push and whatnot, and she would be debating Lincoln Douglas, and like at school she'd be doing, going back to the school topic, she'd be doing AP history. And like, she didn't know how many people were in Congress, right? So she knew to read a politics dissad or whatever when her opponent said X, but she, like, in real life, she didn't know how many people were in Congress. She didn't know how many senators there were, but she knew it for the test, and she knew it to read cards. And like, yeah, that aspect of debate, I think I could deal with that. The whole just dancing, or I would love to get your thoughts on this. Something that I've noticed too, and my kids complain about all the time, and we could probably do a whole podcast on student complaints and our complaints. My kids say something, then the other team will get up, and they, no matter what happens in the round, our opponents did not respond to this. They dropped this. They have no evidence. And it's like they're just reading this script of bad things we may or may not have done.
Right. And kind of leaving it up to the judge to decide, did that happen or not? And they're typically not
like, oh, they dropped that. Okay.
Yeah. Right. And if they're not paying close enough attention, maybe they believe them. And if they're lying, they're not penalized for it. They're just like, oh, they didn't drop that argument. Yeah. So like take my elementary students. I think that, yeah, like, okay, like if you're 8, like you really cannot think in the same way than if you're 13. Like your brain is a different brain, actually, right? And so you have a huge advantage if your brain is just more developed in juggling complex issues. This is just true.
I tell my middle school kids, in addition to the debate lecture, you're going to get intro to econ and intro to foreign policy. Like the NFU topic, we did a whole lecture on nukes to make sure that they knew what an ABM was, what an ICBM was, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and you're right. Maybe it's part of it is sort of the development of the brain, but part of it is also the expansion of your knowledge base and being able to link kind of disparate parts of the world and studies kind of together in order to develop more subtle thinking about things. Yet with these elementary students, they're still going to tournaments. They're still doing that, and so for some of my teams, I have scripted everything that they're going to say for the entire debate, right? And there's a way that it feels dishonest, and it feels sort of antithetical to the idea of the practice, which is to develop your own thinking skills on the one hand. And this is true, right?
I think at that stage they need the training wheels, though.
Yes. The flip side is that I have I've been coaching, I guess, for 5 years now, and I've tried both approaches, right? I've tried, let's say, the learning centered approach and the winning centered approach, right? And scripting everything for them makes them win. That's the problem I have with it, right? And so if I run my classes in a way that tries to sort of incrementally develop their critical thinking skills, they're going to go to the tournament. They're going to lose to kids who have everything scripted out for them, right? And so I don't know how to deal with that exactly, right? There are some kind of rules that you can add to the game to try to stop that. For example, limiting evidence to a certain number of cards for younger kids, so they can just learn these cards really well. But I don't know how to deal with this problem very elegantly.
At the risk of saying something really hurtful towards the event that I really, really love, when I talk about different types of debate, I tell my kids I love public forum. I'm married to public forum, and I cheat on it all the time with Parley. I love Parley too. Like I love the I used to do extended impromptu, and I did a little Parley in high school too. I love the limited. Here's a topic. You have 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Come up with an idea, right? And so I try to push a lot of my PF kids to also at least try 1 or 2 Parley tournaments just for the experience of like thinking on your feet and like be on edge. Going back to public forum, I've thought about the issue that you just outlined, right? Back in the early days of PF too. It might not even been called PF yet. And I thought my personal solution was we should make the event paperless. You are not allowed to bring a single sheet of paper or laptop into the round. And then you actually legitimately, because and I hate to sound like an old fart, but back in my day, right? Like when I was doing PF when it was first created, what attracted me to it was that it was supposed to be super light, right? I think in the original PF rules, I don't know if you've seen these, but like the original PF rules said you couldn't reuse any judge with like judging experience. So every tournament you had to have a fresh pool of absolute novice judges, right? And they quickly amended that rule because you'd quickly deplete your pool, right? But I love that aspect of it. And then what's it called? Summary was 2 minutes and final focus was 1 minute back when the event was first created. We called it, it wasn't final focus, it was called last shot. And so you had 1 minute final words. Like, so you could not get up there and read more evidence and cards. You just got up there and like the one most important thing you collapsed on, right? And I just thought that was great. And then all the people from policy and Lincoln Douglas came over to public forum, and then they whined about summary being 2 minutes long. We need more time to read more stupid, crappy cards. Even though I think I was taking, I was clicking around on your online course, right? And then like for summary, you should summarize. Right? That's the title of the speech, right? And instead, like I go over this, I'm sure you go over this with your kids too, right? Everyone treats summary as extended rebuttal, right? And I absolutely hate it, right? And so yeah, my mind going back to the fix, like I thought, man, it'd be so awesome if you didn't have paper or laptops and you just had to go in there and just know what the heck you were talking about, God forbid, right? And that's what I love about Parley. And going back to like the San Francisco Bay Area market, right? The most competitive schools, like in terms of like resources, dominate Lincoln Douglas, policy debate, and then to some extent public forum, right? Because they have all the coaches and resources. I remember, shout out Patrick and Justin.
When you say resources as a tangent, what do you think the most important things are?
I think
money. How would that make better debaters? Coaches, I understand. You have more money to hire better, and more.
So to use my old high school as an example, we had this great policy team, Patrick and Justin, and they made it to NSDA policy finals. I want to say 2008ish, somewhere around there. And so they got matched up against a private school down in SoCal, and it was so clear that it was a public school versus a private school. Because on stage, like I'm in the audience, like waiting to watch finals, right? On stage, you see our team at the time, I believe, was coached by my first debate coach, Mark Woodhead, and his brother Tom, right? So it was 2 of our alumni who used to do policy back in the day, right? Trying their best to prep their kids for the national final round. And then the team from SoCal across from them, I think had like 10 coaches, all hovering and handing them files and whatnot. It was like a NASCAR pit crew. Right. And so at that point, especially in policy, right, where cards can win the day, right? You're not going to, it's going to be very, very hard for you to compete. Right. And so like, it was great that our team even got to that round Cinderella story. And then that's, then the clock strikes midnight and you're against a school with 10 coaches that are hovering. Whereas going back to like Parley, right, the limited prep, right, it really equalizes that. So like here in the Bay Area, if you look at the schools that are good at parliamentary debate, it's actually a lot of schools that have like student run teams. And I personally just find it really refreshing.
These are really excellent ideas. So the idea about limited prep, this is something I've been exposed to with world schools a little bit. I don't know. I have no experience at all with Parley, unfortunately. I don't know if world schools is kind of adjacent to that somehow.
I feel like every market has some version of it. Like even I instructed middle schoolers in parliamentary debate at Stanford a couple of summers in a row. And I would talk to the high school kids that did Parley and the college students, and even they were like, "Oh yeah, there's West Coast Parley and East Coast Parley, and this is how private schools run Parley and community colleges, et cetera, et cetera." But yeah, like
I know
there's some limited prep aspect of it.
I know here in Asia, like there's a style like Asian parliamentary, and I'm not sure what that means, but I think that's what most of the debaters do, especially in their local languages.
Cool.
But yeah, so yeah, there's the really good thing about it is that you do have some kind of reliance on your own spoken word and your own knowledge base. Even if you can do some research, it's limited, and then your skills are like not how much can someone help you to prep, but how much can you efficiently find the key resources you need in these 20 minutes or something, right?
These kids have it so good with their iPhones during that 20 minutes of prep. Like when I did high school Parley, right? Like if I didn't know something, I just got slaughtered.
But it's a valuable skill too, right? Because research. Talking about building academic skills, like research is probably just one of the very few key skills for academics.
But actually, going back to the school point, right? Like, it's so funny, right? Like when we're in school, especially you've seen all those memes about math class, right? Back in the day, your teacher's like, you won't always have a calculator in your pocket.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And then, now we all have smartphones, right? And then they put us in these test settings, right? Sit down at your desk and don't talk to anybody for an hour, and you don't get any internet access, and write an essay. And then you get into the real world, and like no one does that, right? Like you'll never be in that environment ever again. And you're right. Like I've had so many of my former students, whenever I catch up with them, tell me like, "Oh yeah, you're absolutely right about like the whole research aspect. Like I'm in college now. We have a paper on this and this topic, and I already have read 5 articles on it. I'm gonna pull up the same articles, and I do the same thing, right? My what's it called? I had to do a project on renewable energy or write an essay about it, right? And then my kids are probably a Parley tournament, and they get a renewable energies topic, and I'm like, okay, forward the Google Doc to them.
Yeah. And so in any case, this is one is talking about like perhaps adding some rules or modifying something to deal with the as you've dubbed it, DDRification of debate. I think this is crucial. Of course, you lose on the back end the depth of knowledge that you can sort of develop on a single topic.
If I can,
and I think that's probably
that point. This is something I tell my kids. I don't know if you say anything similar. I feel like no matter what the debate topic is, at least in my experience, and this goes for middle school, high school, or whatever, and it also goes for me judging too. I feel like it's important that the kids on whatever side they're on to really, really know 5 or 6 cards. And that's really all you should really need, right? Like you should have 2 or 3 cards that really are the basis of your case, right? Your 4-minute case, right? Like one solid card per contention. And then maybe like 1 or 2 like really, really great source indictments or counters to like the main point that the other side is trying to make, right? And I tell my students this, going back to the whole summary speech thing, right? And final focus with voters, right? Like so many students want to, and by the way, I've become sort of an a-hole in this regard. Before debates start in public forum now, I don't have judging preferences anymore. I have judging requirements. And so like before the round starts, I totally believe in judge adaptation, right? I think that's why we do this activity, right? I think Mark Niles mentioned in your interview where he's like, yeah, like you want experienced judges in poll, but there should also be the lay judges there that the kids learn how to adopt to, right? So before the rounds start in public forum now, when I'm judging, I tell the kids, okay, here are my preferences, right? The following is the requirement. In the final focus, the last minute or so, you must give me 2 or 3 clearly articulated and labeled voting issues. If you do not, and your opponent says my one voting issue is the sky is blue, I will vote for him or her, right? And I tell kids this, It's like exactly like that, right? You must do this or you will lose. And half of them don't do it. Right.
Crazy.
And so, right. It's like I am telling you how to win. You will win
This
if you
is
say
for
this word.
this
right?
is
And
for
they don't
like
do
middle
it.
and high school students.
Middle and high school. I started doing this the past year.
You've done this to high school students before, and they haven't given you voting.
Haven't done it because they're
insane.
Again, like the Zoom screen just becomes DDR to them, and like they look at their flow and like, oh no, I got to touch this, I got to touch that. I even tell them like the worst thing you can do is I even tell them throw away the flow in the final focus. I don't care about it anymore, right? I just give me your 2 or 3 voting issues. I will flow those off to the side of my flow and stare at them when I'm trying to like decide my ballot. And I'm telling you, 50% of the kids don't do it, and that really that really scares me, right? Because like again, I believe that this activity should train kids, for the future and be better people and all whatnot, right? So like if you're at a job and your boss is like, I need you to print this on blue paper, and you just print it on white, then like you can't follow a simple instruction, right?
That's an insightful as well. I need to be taking more notes about all of these things, but so I've never heard of a judge doing that first. But it sounds like
I gotta warn you. What's it called? Like, be careful which of my preferences and stuff that you test.
No. Like, so it's a big issue with a lot of kids. The issue about judge preferences, where maybe judges will or will not write their preferences, right, in tab room, let's say, right? And then
I was going to talk about
if they do have preferences, maybe they do or do not follow those preferences, right? And and then maybe live, you can encourage students to look for some kind of feedback from the judge for some kind of facial expressions, for some kind of eye contact. Maybe the judges give that, maybe they don't. Maybe live you would have that, maybe you wouldn't, right? And so there's a way that judges can be a complete sort of black box. Zoom adds an entire layer of opacity to that, but even live, you don't know what someone's thinking, right? And it's very hard to, despite the fact that we should have judging preferences, right? And so this is another classic problem, right? I tell students they should talk to the judges, like talk to them, because they're people and maybe they can tell you what they want. But the fact that you explicitly gives that solves the problem effectively, and I think adds an element of like more effective training that you're saying, like listen to the things that I'm saying and you can win, and if you don't, you won't. And also I think probably
it makes me feel better too, because when they don't do the thing I told them to do, then I no longer have guilt from dropping teams.
It's their fault. Yeah, exactly. And I think it can also level the playing field a little bit, right? Because there's this element of luck that like maybe the judge just likes this thing about this team's style and not this other team's style, when how are the teams supposed to know that, right, about the judge? So I love this. I really, really like this. I've never heard of it, but I really, really love it. The other thing that you mentioned that I really love is the thought about going paperless, right? So once again, I think for either having a limited prep time for like a novel topic when you go into the debate, and for going paperless, for either or both of those rules, you would lose, as I said, the depth of the topic. But I 1,000% agree with you that it's a very small price to pay for developing students' actual like communication and actual listening skills and actual, like time limited research or preparation skills. I really like that.
I think some Parley tournaments do this, and I really like it. They release topic areas, so they tell you round 1's going to be Africa, round 2 is going to be U.S. foreign policy. And so then before the tournament, me and my kids, if it's a big tournament night before, we actually will make sure like, okay, like what are the top 3 stories that we should all kind of be familiar with in each of these areas? And then that way, like, even if they don't get that exact topic, they have something that's related to it.
Yeah, and that sort of depth that we get in maybe policy, it might be a little bit more merited because you spend a whole year on the topic, but in public forum, it's not like useful often, right? Like how much detail do middle school kids need on arcane US law, like how useful is that for their life? Like probably not much. And so you're right. Like if you were to, let's say, give a US healthcare lecture where they generally know some things about US healthcare, very useful in thinking about healthcare anyway, right? Obviously kids aren't policymakers, but in thinking about that's quite useful. But like studying the minutia of like Medicare for all bill, less useful.
Actually, it's funny. I think you might have mentioned policy. I used to be a policy debate hater. I actually, let me back up. I was trained to be a policy debater when I first entered, and I think something that you said in your last interview was I personally tell kids policy is NASCAR, right? So it's the top of the top, all the skills, and then everything like trickles down from there, right? So all the other debates borrow from everything that's developed in the policy racetrack, right? But I used to hate it because of just how technical it was, all the game players, and the speed. My threshold for speed is I debated at 200 words per minute. I told kids I can flow up to 3, and then after that, you've lost me, right? So that was my view on policy for the longest time. And then I volunteered to judge the Urban Debate League tournaments that Mark mentioned in that interview, and I judged policy. And the kids that are doing policy now are, especially in that league, are amazing. Right? They actually like, this is our inherency, this is this, and they actually covered all their bases, and they actually spoke at a very like presentational speed and whatnot. And I was just dumbfounded when I was judging. I was like, oh my God, like policy debate has morphed into like what I was doing with public forum, but with extended time so they can even like thoroughly explain stuff, right? As opposed to now, like, I feel, I don't know what the speed is like over in Taiwan, but yeah, the kids are definitely debating faster than 200 words per minute in a lot of the rounds that I'm judging. And then, they don't actually know how some of their arguments would work, right? Like this was especially apparent with the NFU topic that we had recently, right? So some kid I remember in a round said something like, the United States is going to get hit by an ICBM, right? Like the delivery system, not the warhead, right? Okay. And I'm like, oh no, I think they even said we'd get hit by an ABM, right? That's an anti-ballistic, but that shoots the missiles down, right? Like again, like they're reading a card very fast, and I don't even know if they know what they're reading.
Yeah, I feel like there's, the idea of like physics envy, that like everyone hates physics because they can't do it. I feel like that's the case for policy. And I feel the same way, by the way, but I feel like it's I have some jealousy about it. And that's what sort of like spurs my hatred towards it. But the fact is I never competed policy debate. And so in judging policy rounds, I don't like the fact that I'm judging based on the things that I understand and not everything that they said, because I feel like that would be fair judging, right? Is I am understanding what you're saying, right? Not that I pick up some things and I'm writing down some things. But there's other judges that are judging the same rounds, and based on their comments, they certainly understand everything that was going on, right? And so I fault myself as a judge, or I just say I don't want to judge policy debate. Actually,
we can only know what we know.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so I wouldn't want to take away from the kids that sort of elite or any credibility away from that kind of elite level of debate, even though I don't feel like that's part of my life.
Like what you're touching on is how a lot of our parents feel all the time, right? So like so many of my parents was like, I don't need to do any training. I don't need to do this, right? And have you seen the movie Great Debaters?
I don't think so. No, I've heard of it though.
There's a scene where he's training his team and he has them repeating this like mantra. And he asks them, who is the judge? And I think they say the judge is God because he decides who wins and who loses. And so that's just what I tell all my parents. They're like, but I don't know how to judge. And I'm like, you're perfect. You're God.
Yeah.
You don't understand. Yeah, if you don't understand, that's their fault. Right. Like I really like, I don't know why, but I really like advertising. Right. I like good commercials and like good advertising. Right. I grew up watching Bewitched and Mad Men when I was older. And I tell the kids, like, your job during a debate round is to be an effective commercial to sell whatever side you're selling. And if the judge doesn't understand you, then you're just like a crappy commercial that was like poorly written, and then they don't buy your product, and that's your fault, and you should definitely lose, right? I would want you to lose, right? Like you should actually sit down and think about the message that you're trying to sell, right? And actually, jumping into like argumentation, right? Like I really also hate this sort of this like, I don't want to say I hate contention level debate, but like ultimately, I feel like the job of most teams on most topics on most sides is to sell a message or an idea, right? Kind of like Inception, right? If I could just plant this one idea and land this thought, right, then we should be able to win, right? So like if you look at like the best companies, right, like Nike is Just Do It. A lot of their commercials don't even show you the product. They just show you the stupid little swoosh mark and some guy lifting weights and whatnot or running, and they're selling you on this idea that you should just go out there and give it your all, whatever. And then, by the way, buy a product with a check mark on it, right? And so, like, when I coach, at least, like that's my strategy is, and that's why I like framework debate, right? Like I want my students to tell the judge, hey, like this is the topic, and this is how you should think about it, right? I think a good example of that was, and it's actually funny. The other reason I like the social media topic was it took me back to one of my old favorite topics. The topic was state quals 2008, and it was presidential primaries are contrary to democratic values. And it was such an easy topic on the affirmative because the presidential primaries are so screwed up, right? Like certain states vote before other states. Certain states you have to be registered Democrat to vote in the Democratic primary or not, yada, yada, yada. There's like, if you live in Rhode Island, you have more power than some person that lives in California like me. There's a million different things that you could complain about with the presidential primary. And I was sitting with my kids and I was like, yeah, as bad as all this crap is about the presidential primary, we used to not have them. And now we have them. And like, isn't more choice more democratic? And that was the message we sold in our teams won. Right? Just got out there in the final photo, in the last shot, last minute, judge, more choice is always more democratic. Right? And there's like, that's right. I didn't used to pick out the Democratic candidate, and now I do. Right? And instead of having to go contention 1, contention 2, contention 3, and just reading a bunch of cards.
Yeah, I think this applies for public forum debate. So I wanted to ask you, actually, I have this whole list of questions, and we've gone through all of them very organically, which is awesome. But one of the ones that I think is most interesting is just this talk about what you see as potential futures for debate or innovations on debate. And it sounds like if we're going to make a style of debate called Brooks debate, it would be limited time. You'd have maybe topic areas. You'd go paperless. You could have judge win requirements instead of trying to feel out the sort of the nebulous ethos of a judge. Are there any other things that you? I'm a basketball
fan. I like when there's like an actual hoop that you have to shoot at.
Yeah, I really like that too. So judging debate is very subjective, and there could be some good things about that. I don't know. But I
think it is. And actually, if I could share one of the favorite things I've ever heard from a coach, we had this great assistant coach at Logan, Tim Campbell. He was one of our speech coaches, and he's an amazing fantasy baseball player. Like he wins his fantasy league like every year, right? And one of the things he said that's always stuck with me, he says, and by the way, he coached over like 10 years and coached state champions and highest levels, right? And one thing he said before he retired, he said, I really like forensics. I think it's a good activity. I don't think it's a great activity. Far too many talented kids get cheated. Right. And yeah, like I don't know what your experience is and if they have this in Taiwan, but for instance, one of the things I've prided myself as a coach on is I very rarely, if ever, go to tab room to protest or complain about something. Like even if something really bad happens to my kids, like I just, especially if it's not the state or national tournament, I just tell my kids, hey, your judge made a mistake or yada yada, right? Like that's that, right? Like move on, go debate the next round. Like this, not the. stuff happens in life, like this is good training for that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Oh, funny story though.
Learning that life is very unfair and that it bites you sometime for no particular reason.
Yeah, real quick, funny story. The one time that I totally had my kids back, and it still didn't turn out well. My kids debated around in public forum at a local tournament here in the Bay Area. The judge announced the decision in favor of them, and then the other team started yelling and arguing and like continuing the debate. Like, no, they're wrong when they said da 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 da.
With
and
the
then
judge.
The judge changed their ballot after announcing a decision.
Oh my god!
So I heard that story. I was like, okay, I will get up for this.
Yeah, I mean, it does happen sometimes, because as a judge, I try to communicate with the debaters as much as possible. Like when I'm giving an RFD, it's mostly questions. I mostly have them talk during my RFD, because I want to know what is their thinking process and their prep process, and I'll ask to look at their materials and stuff, because I find it just more engaging and a better conversation to talk with the debaters instead of when they're zoning out.
I did that one time, and I got a team to talk themselves into a loss that I already had marked on the ballot. Right? It was so funny. I saw this team in octafinals, and I picked them up. They're great. And then the following round, they accused their opponent of running a counterplan. And they're like, by definition, like being an ex-policy debater, I know generally what a plan and counterplan is, right? Like I teach my students, you need an agent of action, a timetable, a funding source, and some sort of plan text. Like, here's what we're going to do, right? At the very minimum, you should have like those 4 things, right? And so they spent the whole round just whining, our opponents are cheating, they're running a counterplan, da 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 da. And at the very end of the round, I looked up at them and I was like, hey, what are the parts of a plan? You need an actor, timetable, funding. Okay, cool. Did your opponent have all those for their counterplan? No. Okay, you lose. Thank you. Right?
Yeah.
Make my life
easy. Well, it can be instructive, exactly, because if you said like, okay, I don't believe there's a counter plan and therefore you lose, they might feel
my opinion.
Like, they totally had a counter plan. But you're talking them through the logic and talking with them through the logic, which is good. But that does present the opportunity for them to protest sometimes, right? Like you drop this crucial argument, like, no, we didn't. I don't know. It's not on my flow. So it does become a conversation, but I think it's a useful one potentially. That's all that I have as far as questions. I think it's pretty much a good place to end. Where can people find you, especially for coaching? And sort of what areas do you serve?
Mostly, as long as we are doing this online.
Yeah.
I tried, what's it called? I was just building my website right before jumping on with you. I was trying to get my stupid Google domain to work, and it's not working. But if people just go on LinkedIn or Facebook and search Brooks Debate, I'm sure they'll find me, Stephen Brooks. And so, yeah, like if it was like online distance coaching, I could definitely do that as long as we're still on Zoom and we haven't gotten sick of this, right?
Yeah, Zoom is awesome.
Yeah, like I said, like
good
80-90% of these tournaments on Zoom are great and all, but you're right. Like there's definitely like was you said it was like a layer of opacity or whatever. Like sometimes it's hard to tell what the judges are thinking.
Yeah.
I on that note, like I had this friend of mine, Lena, and she's so nice. Like she judges almost every weekend for us, right? And she just likes the activity and likes to help out. She's not even a debater herself. And the last tournament we were at, one of the last tournaments, I got called by one of the tab staff, like, hey, there's a complaint against your judge. She's not paying attention, right? And one team complained about her because she was on camera, like flowing, but then like someone in her house said something to her, and like she like looked away to talk to them for a little bit, but she was still flowing and listening. Like she even showed me like I have all the flows and this and that. I'm just like,
yeah.
Some kids are just trying to game the system and complain to tab to get a free win. And again, like I don't know if that's a life skill if they want to be a Karen in the future or whatever, but
maybe
let me talk to the debate management.
This can be a competing debate style alongside Brooks debate, Karen debate. You just put them in a room and whoever complains the loudest wins the debate.
Complain to tab the most. Yeah, like I don't know if you're a believer in this, but like I'm a firm believer in debate karma and the debate gods, right? Just like I tell my kids, like I wish more selfishly, I wish more teams had this approach or more coaches had this approach. I would always tell my kids, like, you guys are a reflection of me. Like, I'm your coach, right? So if you're a little a-hole in your debate rounds, that's going to get back to me somehow. And I don't want that.
True.
Right. And like, again, like you should hopefully come out of this activity a better person. Right. So that's why yeah, if I can avoid it, I don't want to complain and tap about small stuff. Like they have a tournament to run. Right. And if your opponent said something and like they said you dropped an argument, but you didn't or whatever, like that's life. Right. Like you just deal with it. Right. And so, yeah, like, I don't know. Like I believe there's some karma to this activity. Right. And hopefully it ends up evening out. Right. Cause like, I don't know what your experience is, but like, bad things will happen to some of my kids, and you know the ones that ride it out, eventually the ball bounces the other way and good things happen. Sure. I had a team that won a tournament recently, and it was a tournament 4 prelims. They went 2-2. They went 2-2, and the only reason they broke into elims and won was because of speaker points, right? And then after the tournament, I was talking to that team like, this is debate karma, right? you guys weren't jerks. And then the debate god smiled upon you and made sure you have enough speaks to break with a friggin' 2-2.
I love this. This is another analogy I'm going to borrow. DDRification and the debate gods. I love this. All right. Awesome meeting you, Stephen. Let's stay in touch, and I'll send you this interview in 2 weeks, I guess.
Whenever. Thanks so much.
All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joel.